Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Orly Avner. I'm a research scientist at Bosch AI in Haifa. I came all the way, despite the trains. Um, I'll introduce myself in a couple of words. Originally, I graduated from the Technion. I did my first, second, and PhD there. Electrical engineering. My PhD was focused on reinforcement learning, which will hopefully revolutionize robotics someday, but we're still waiting for that. After that, I worked a bit at Intel at a smart mobility startup, and right now I'm a researcher at Bosch. Before I talk about InsertionNet, I'll talk about our group a bit, just so you know who we are and what we do. In general, Bosch has a lot of research going on there. It's all over the world, mainly in Germany, naturally, but there are also research groups in several locations. The team in Haifa was founded about 4 years ago, and the focus is reinforcement learning, computer vision, and robotics. So kind of merging all the different areas. There are also non-robotics related projects, but we're here to talk about robotics. So what we have here is the gang. These are just the full-time researchers. We also have a lot of interns. So if you know anybody looking for an interesting internship, then we're a good place to start. The project that we have, for example, an autonomous dozer that was built kind of from scratch at our lab. Very cool project. We have a lot of computer vision for robotics going on. And the robots that we work with are UR5E and the Franca Animica pandas. So let's talk about InsertionNet. Okay. Just before I start the video, I want you to focus on a few things. You won't see the cameras. We'll see them later on. You'll see how they're mounted. But the robot here is guided by 2 cameras, so it can actually estimate depth, which is important. And I want you guys to notice how smooth the motion is and how robust this is to different changes that we do while the robot is trying to insert the plug. After we see the video, I'll explain what we do, why we do it, what the motivation is. So I have no idea how the clicker plays the movie. I'll just try to do it from here. Okay. So you see a standard AC plug. You don't see the gripper itself. We'll see it later on. But the idea is that insertion is a pretty hard task to do unless you really do it in a very automated way and kind of tell the robot exactly what to do. It's hard to teach it to do it on its own. So this is really a revolutionary project. What you see here is Oren, who actually did most of the work for this project. He's harassing the robot. He's changing the gripping angle. He's moving the board. And the robot is supposed to actually take all of that into account and still do the insertion. Also, the cameras need to understand that there are obstacles around the hole where they're trying to actually insert the plug. And the occlusions mentioned here in the video are actually when one of Owen's hands obstructs the view. So that's what we saw so far. Now, why is insertion even interesting? Okay, so when we look at the assembly world, and Bosch naturally has a lot of assembly going on in its factories, then we see that a lot of the tasks can actually be broken down into stuff that has to do with insertion. Okay. Oh, got it. You're maybe under more. Hide. No. Strange. Okay, so we have all these tasks that can be mapped to an insertion problem. And the thing is that the tasks are very diverse. It's not that I can teach the robot one insertion task and that's going to be, one task to rule them all. So I need the robot to be able to learn how to work with different parts and how to insert into different locations. And I need this training process to be very simple and efficient because otherwise no factory is ever going to adopt it. There are human people doing it well enough. And the execution, of course, needs to be accurate and it needs to be robust. We need to be very good. So just to show you the video of this lady that we're kind of competing with, this is from a Bosch factory. And I believe this is either a cooktop or an oven that she's assembling. And you see that she started by inserting these screw heads, and now she has all these cables that need to be inserted at their ends. And there's a lot of insertion going on here, okay? What you can also see is that the tasks are different. Now, why would anyone even think of adding a robot here? She seems to be doing a very good job. Manpower is a huge issue in assembly. People don't want to do it, and skilled people don't want to stay on the job for a long time. So actually, there's a huge shortage of assembly workers in Bosch and in other factories as well. So the motivation here is very obvious. Okay, how does InsertionNet work? What it says here is overview, but yeah, never mind. So what is our setup? We have a UR5E robot, which you see here, and a mount that we printed using a simple 3D printer. And on the mount, we have two RealSense cameras. Actually, we don't really need the RealSense cameras. We don't use the depth signal. We just use the RGB. But RealSense are very nice to mount. So just the practicalities of life. And the reason that there are two cameras, like I mentioned before, is that so the networks can actually infer some kind of depth signal in order to understand how far we are from the hole. Also important are the readings that we get from the robot sensors. So the UR5E has an integrated force sensor, but we can also work with external force sensors. And from there, we get a reading of the moment and the force. So basically, the observation that we get from the robot is two RGB images from the two cameras, the force and the moment. And the action that our algorithm outputs is simply the correction, okay? Some kind of delta in the XYZ plane and the different angles. So we just tell the robot where the end effector needs to be compared to where it is right now. That's the action that our algorithm outputs. So it's very simple. And how do we do this? So this is a rare case of AI actually working with robotics. And we have two parts to the policy. So in general, if we have a plug located somewhere in a box near where we're doing our insertion, of course, we don't need AI to map the entire path to the hole, right? We're going to have CAD files for that. It's very easy to automize. There's no need for AI there. But for the small corrections around the hole, whether the board was moved compared to the location that we thought it would be at, or whether the lighting has changed, or all the stuff that AI can generalize and be good at, that's where we have the residual policy. And it's activated at a certain distance from the whole surface, and that's where it does its heavy lifting. So the input, as I said before, we have the force sensor and we have the images. They go through a ResNet network just to get out what's interesting for our algorithm. Then there's a small fully connected neural network and the output that I mentioned before, the correction. So that's basically all there is to it. The cool part, I mean, one of the cool parts is that we gather data in an autonomous way. So what it says up there is backward data collection. And what we do is we actually take the robotic arm, position it inside the hole in the target, and then we just hit play. And what it does is, I'll show you the movie in a minute, it simply randomizes different points around the hole, goes there, collects the data point, right, the observation, and calculates the delta, which is what it's going to have to predict later on when it is outside the hole and wants to reach the hole itself. So that's what we have here in kind of pseudocode. We decide how many data points we need. We'll discuss that in a second. We register the final position, our target, and then we just register the pose and the observation for these different locations. So it looks like this. No need for the voice there, but never mind. Okay, so this is naturally sped up, but the important thing is that nobody needs to babysit this. Okay, we were presenting this inside Bush a couple of days ago, and what the engineer said was that this was really a key feature for him because there were no people at assembly lines to actually sit and collect data and tag data, all the stuff that you need for supervised learning usually. So here we have samples that are tagged, but they're collected without a human operator. Okay. The training process is pretty simple, as you've probably understood. We have our observation, the images, the sensor readings. We have the prediction, which is actually what the network outputs. And then we calculate the loss because the true delta was measured when we gathered the sample. So it's simply a supervised regression problem, very sample efficient, very quick because the networks are pretty small. And if we're talking about numbers, then we have for the AC plug that you saw at the beginning, about 50 data points. And the training plus the data collection are around 15 minutes. So if I want to add a new assembly part to my cooktop, and I just need to teach the system how to do that, then it's something that an engineer at the plant will be willing to do. Okay, robustness generalization. Naturally, we do some data augmentation so that we have some more than these just 50 data points. And let's look at some results. So what you're going to see here in the video is 5 minutes. Yeah, okay. What you're going to see here is different kinds of plugs. And what you see in the plot is, yikes, I did not see that, is the time of completion versus the success rate. Now, it's important to notice that the axis starts at 97%. Okay, so it's doing well, I guess. And what you're going to see at the end of the video is something that we call one-shot learning, or is called one-shot learning, where we're actually going to generalize to a plug that we didn't train on. So these are all plugs that we trained on in the same manner that I showed before. Different kinds of pulleys and different kinds of plugs. And you're going to see a red pulley in a minute, which the network did not encounter beforehand in the training process, but it will generalize to it just because it knows what to do. Okay, great. Just one note that I forgot to mention before, and I think it's very interesting. We use these standard gripper fingers, but sometimes they're not good enough. For example, we have a project inside Bush where we need to put a blower inside the cooktop. And a blower is a very big part, and these fingers just don't grip it well enough. And once you get some resistance from the box that it's supposed to sit in, then it kind of starts rocking and the whole thing doesn't work. But the solution is very simple. You take a 3D printer, you take 3 hours, you print fingers that are specific for the blower, you train it, and it works. So the solution is really highly customizable, and I think it's part of its beauty. Also, one point that I think is worth mentioning, because our policy is multi-model, it uses both vision and force, we don't really need to crash into the board to understand that we hit it, right? We have vision for that. So what you see here is the force applied or measured by the sensor of the robot. If we use vision, that's the blue line, and if we don't use vision. So if we don't use vision, we actually need the surface to understand that we hit it. And this is very big when you're talking about gentle objects that you need to work with. Okay. I think this is just a fluff slide that I can skip. And so to summarize, we're talking about very good performance and a very lightweight system, which is really non-trivial when we're talking about AI. We don't need a human demonstrator. We collect data on ourselves, by ourselves, and we have a very robust solution. So question time.